This Sunday, the city of Atlanta snubbed, eliminated from the Democratic National Committee search for a city to host the 2028 nominating convention.
Not having the convention in Atlanta could potentially be a big deal.
It very well could be. Atlanta's mayor now accusing party leaders of abandoning black voters.
Also, cost of living concerns taking center stage in the race for governor, with the midterms now less than 75 days away.
And candidates in the race to become Georgia's top educator go on the record with us.
Our kids are doing well. Graduation rates are at all-time high. Opportunities for kids are unmatched.
For me, this position is not about party lines. It's about what's doing best for Georgia's kids.
Now, from Atlanta News First, the issues that matter to you. This is On the Record.
And this Sunday, Atlanta leaders say the Democratic National Committee is abandoning black voters after the city was cut from the list of potential hosts for the 2028 Democratic National Convention. Good Sunday morning. I'm Doug Reardon.
And I'm Rick Fulbaum. The Democratic National Committee just kicked Atlanta and Chicago to the curb. It's now down to liberal strongholds Boston, Denver, and Philadelphia. Party leaders did not specify why our city was eliminated as an option for where the party will officially nominate its next candidate for president. But DNC Chair Ken Martin said in a statement, quote, "The city's put forward incredibly strong bids, and he promised the convention would be an inspiring celebration of our party's future nominee."
It is a decision that Atlanta Mayor Andre Dickens says proves party leaders are, in his words, unwilling to do the bare minimum to support the base of the party. In a scathing letter obtained by Atlanta News First, Mayor Dickens wrote, quote, "They are afraid to leave their comfort zone and are blind to the fact that the South is the answer. They're abandoning Atlanta, abandoning the South, and once again, abandoning black voters." In Georgia, just over 1 million people voted in May in the Democratic primary, including 30% of active voters in Atlanta's Fulton County. About 12% of that voting bloc is made up of black voters.
Atlanta News First reporter Abby Kasouris breaks down the fallout.
Atlanta Mayor Andre Dickens came out swinging with a letter addressed to Atlanta, the South, and all Democrats. Atlanta Mayor Andre Dickens sent this letter to Democratic leaders blasting the party's decision. In it, he writes, "For the DNC to not even include Atlanta in the short list means the DNC does not consider Atlanta or Georgia relevant to the past, present, or future of the Democratic Party." Dickens goes on to say his own party is, quote, "abandoning Atlanta, abandoning the South, and once again, abandoning black voters." Dickens points to the State Farm Arena and what he calls Atlanta's ranking as the best city to host the World Cup. The DNC hasn't said why Atlanta or Chicago got cut. DNC Chair Ken Martin has said for months the party's future runs through the South. The night before Thursday's announcement, he sat down with CNN to talk about the party's momentum heading into the midterms.
In election after election after election, Democrats are winning. We are beating our Republicans. And that overperformance, as I mentioned, is a historic 14 percentage points.
Critics say that confidence doesn't match how the party is treating the South. So why not Atlanta? It's the question at the center of Dickens' anger, and one the DNC has yet to answer.
Not having the convention in Atlanta could potentially be a big deal. But does it matter for this year? No. Does it matter for 2028? Maybe. Particularly if it's very close.
Political science professor Ben Taylor says Atlanta's been a finalist before and come up short before. He's skeptical the decision proves the party is abandoning black voters, but he says politics is about face-to-face interaction.
I'm shaking your hand. You're shaking my hand. I met you at this convention in person. We shared a Coca-Cola Classic together or something else.
Atlanta City Council had already set aside about $36 million to host. Dickens says he's, quote, "ready for Democratic leadership willing to fight for the South." A final call in the host city comes later this year. This isn't just hurt feelings over a convention. Dickens' letter makes it clear this is about promises made to the South. In Atlanta, I'm Abby Kasouris.
And we're joined by our panel now. Scott Turner, former Republican state representative and founder of the Eternal Vigilance Action Group, and also Democratic public policy advocate and former candidate for Georgia State Senate, Deborah Shigley. We appreciate you guys.
Thanks for being here.
Yeah, very much coming on the record. We got a lot to talk about this week, but we'll start with this, what some would consider a snub of Atlanta for the DNC. They really wanted it. And Deborah, in that letter that we got from the mayor, he said this is akin to abandoning black voters and abandoning Southern voters in the Democratic Party. Is that the way you see it?
Well, it's certainly a missed opportunity. I mean, the three cities that have made it to the short list, that would be Denver, Boston, Philadelphia. The last two in particular, that is the definition of the past. That is the definition of the past of this country, the past of the party. And the opportunity, the momentum is here in the South. So it certainly is a big disappointment.
I think a lot of political journalists here in Atlanta were upset that the convention will not be here so that we could cover it in our own backyard. But I don't think anybody was upset as Mayor Dickens. What did you make of his response, Scott?
Well, anytime Democrats want to start fighting each other as a Republican, my first instinct is to step back and let them. But I've got to be sympathetic with the point of view that Mayor Dickens expressed, only because the DNC is exhibiting a great deal of elitism. I think here in Georgia and the South generally, we tend to think that the Northerners and the elitists at the national level look down on us. And I think this feeds into that narrative.
I wonder what you think about that, Deborah. Do voters pay attention to this? Is this something that's going to be on the minds of Georgia Democrats when they go to the polls either this November or 2 years from now?
Probably not. I think the average voter, especially right now, is worried about putting food on the table. Can they afford their children's basketball uniforms? What are they going to do about healthcare in this very bad Trump economy? So the sort of beltway and Politico conversations about the DNC, I don't think that's really top of mind.
Yeah, and we should note, of course, the RNC has already been selected to be in Houston in 2028. But Scott, there's a lot of calculus that goes into picking these host cities most of the time. What do you think was at play here? Because also consider that, Mayor Dickens had just rolled out all this brand new infrastructure for the World Cup. The city council had set aside $38 million for this, and yet still we weren't even in the top three. So what do you think was going on there?
Well, you have to look at the cities that they picked, right? I mean, or at least that made the final list. Denver, blue state. Democrats don't really need Denver. Don't need Colorado. Boston? Are you serious?
Right.
That's not something that you would think if
Blue
you're trying to
Not up for grabs.
You're trying to expand your horizon. But I think what was really telling in the letter, in the reaction from the Democrats here in Georgia, was that they weren't told personally. They didn't even pick up the phone and give them a call to let them know, after spending all that time and money making their bid here, that they were notified through the media. And the level of disrespect that showed from the DNC to Georgia Democrats was incredible.
On top of the fact that Ken Martin was here just a couple of weeks ago surveying some of the places that would have been good to host this event.
I think if nothing else, this guarantees Andre Dickens a primetime speaking spot wherever the convention is held. They're going to have to sort of try to save face in some way. What do you think this says, Deborah, about the city of Atlanta? Because as Doug mentioned, we're coming off the World Cup. I mean, even MARTA is doing well. People are happy with the public transportation here. Is this a blow to the city's overall image?
I don't think it's a blow to the image. I mean, we had a very successful World Cup. We had a fantastic PR around the world. I mean, people really enjoyed our city and our infrastructure and all of our great businesses. Everything was shown off very well. So it would have been great to build on that momentum, having the DNC convention here. But I think the city will continue to shine.
All right, guys, thank you very much. Coming up next on the record, the affordability agenda. Candidates in the race for governor reveal their plans to bring down prices for families across Georgia.
Plus, Senator John Ossoff striking a chord and angering President Trump and his supporters with a speech that's now going viral. Why he mentioned a White House aide by name and what it could mean for the Democrats' re-election bid.
Welcome back. On the record right now, the race for Georgia governor.
Yeah, we're heating that one up for sure. Republican nominee Rick Jackson is promising lower taxes if he's elected. That was a promise he made in the last couple of days. Jackson unveiled his new policy on income and property taxes last week. It includes a proposal to cut the state income tax in half. Jackson also wants to immediately freeze property taxes if he's elected, saying that voters tell him all the time they're unable to afford those rising rates. And if this sounds familiar, it's because state lawmakers tried to pass bills in the last legislative session to eliminate both the income and property taxes. They had to settle for much more modest cuts on both. Jackson says he'll take a different approach, basing property tax rates on income instead of on the value of a home.
We have it opposite. The budget ought to decide what your taxes are, not the value of your home. So my plan is that your taxes will never go up because of this artificial increase in the value of your home. It will never go up for that reason.
Jackson's plan also calls for delivering relief at the gas pump, triggering an automatic 60-day gas tax suspension when the average price in Georgia per gallon rises 35 cents or more in a week. He also wants to eliminate taxes on residential utilities.
Jackson's opponent, Democrat Keisha Lance-Bottoms, says that she's been focused on lowering costs since the start of her campaign more than a year ago. Bottoms' plan to lower costs include expanding Medicaid to lower health care costs and cracking down on corporate landlords to give Georgians more access to housing. The Former Atlanta mayor also wants to guarantee universal pre-K and work on a pathway to free technical college to ensure more Georgians are prepared for in-demand jobs. A spokesperson for the Bottoms campaign, writing in part, quote, Rick Jackson opposes Medicaid expansion, endorsed tariffs that are driving small businesses out of business, and is against lowering gas taxes for Georgians. There's only one candidate who will lead on lowering costs for Georgians, and that's Keisha Lance Bottoms. And we're back with our panel. All right, Scott, so Rick Jackson's ideas about lowering taxes, I mean, this is pretty boilerplate Republican stuff. One interesting little tidbit was his idea on property taxes and linking that to income. That was something new. What do you make of these proposals that he's put out there compared to what we're hearing from the former mayor of Atlanta, Keisha Lance Bottoms?
I think what you're seeing is the difference between a progressive government-based solution and a conservative set of policies, where the conservative Rick Jackson is saying, you know what? If your things are not affordable for you, why don't we allow you to keep more of your money that you earned so that you can spend it the best way that you think it needs to be spent? And what Keisha Lance Bottoms is proposing is not really affordable. It's more government programs, it's more money being taken out of your pocket to fund those programs, and less choice and empowerment by the individual. And that's the big issue that's on the table for the voters to decide in this election is, do you want more control over your own life, or do you want somebody from the government trying to figure out how best to solve your problems?
You know, and the big thing for Keisha Lance Bottoms when it comes to affordability has been expanding Medicaid. She's talked about it, you know, at length at just about every campaign stop that she has been to. And, you know, that is obviously something we know polling shows people trust Democrats more on healthcare than Republicans. That is just what that shows. Is this going to be the issue, the cornerstone issue for Keisha Lance Bottoms that gets her to the governor's mansion?
It could be. It's certainly the issue they are talking about the most and with the most clarity. I mean, it's interesting. Sometimes politicians will say expand health insurance, but she has been laser focused. We are expanding Medicaid. And while it won't necessarily solve every problem that we have in terms of healthcare in Georgia, it is a concrete thing that she can lead on as governor, and it will make a difference for somewhere between 300,000 to 700,000 Georgians. And that's real things that are affecting their lives right now.
Yeah. And of course, Scott, you know, Rick Jackson is a billionaire. He's a CEO in the healthcare space. While it's staffing, it's still in that space. And, you know, Keisha Lance Bottoms has really kind of attacked him for saying, this is your home and I'm beating you on it. Do you see that as the case with her healthcare policy compared to Rick Jackson's?
Well, I think expanding Medicaid is based on a lie that we're leaving some sort of money on the table. It ignores the fact that federal government dollars have to be used at a 90-10 split to fund that program. And those dollars come from us, or they're borrowed, and we're passing that obligation on to our children. There is no dollars on the table being left by Georgia not expanding Medicaid. That's an IOU with our children's name on it, and that's what we're doing. So that is not an affordable program long term, because those dollars are being borrowed or printed, devaluing our current buying power. As far as Rick Jackson goes, you should never apologize for being successful as Americans. He lived the American dream. He's an example of it, that you can rise up from nothing and build $1 billion corporation that is serving our community in a very key section. I think Rick Jackson is far more polished on the ins and outs of healthcare, and I'm really excited that we have a nominee that can go toe-to-toe with the Democrats on this.
Deborah, as we watch Rick Jackson, you know, he is going into areas that Republican candidates don't typically go into communities that, you know, are mainly communities of color. And I'm wondering if you think this is a good strategy, if it's something that, for Jackson, something that maybe Mayor Bottoms should be concerned about. If he's able to cut into her margins in some of these areas where she really needs to run up as many votes as possible, could that be a problem for her?
Well, I mean, it's a hard sell, first of all. I mean, he is a billionaire trying to progress a affordability agenda, and I don't think he has a lot of credibility on that, to be honest. What Keisha Lance Bottoms is doing is she is shoring up the base. She is also in those rural communities, and she is speaking for everyday Georgians. That is the platform that she is talking about, and I think she's doing a great job talking to voters about their costs, their issues at the polls, all of these things that are day to day and are not so theoretical.
Scott will give you the last word on this.
What we're seeing is the difference between these two policies. I think Rick Jackson is extraordinarily credible on healthcare, and the idea that they're going to attack him for being a billionaire when he has been doing good work is something that is kind of disgusting in a way, to be honest, because they've also tried to tie his state contracts to corruption. Every small business owner that does business with the state is not guilty of corruption. Rick Jackson's not guilty of corruption because of his involvement in providing a service to the state. The question needs to be whether or not the taxpayers are getting a value for their dollar. And not every dollar that comes into Jackson Healthcare goes to Rick Jackson. It's going to the hundreds of thousands of jobs that he's created in a trickle-down effect and the people that he's directly employing. Those are the dollars that are serving our community. And so if we're getting value for that, that's a good thing.
Coming up next, Election Day is Tuesday in Metro Atlanta. Voters in Georgia's 13th Congressional District now preparing to cast their ballots yet again.
This Sunday, a sudden resignation from one of Georgia's statewide elected officials. District 5 Public Service Commissioner, Republican Tricia Pridemore, just announced she's stepping down from the powerful panel. Pridemore was already set to leave her post at the panel in January after launching an unsuccessful run for Congress, but her resignation will now take effect on September 4th. Governor Kemp must now appoint a new commissioner to serve on the panel in the interim. And Election Day is this Tuesday once again.
That is if you live in Georgia's 13th Congressional District. Voters in parts of Newton, Rockdale, Clayton, DeKalb, Gwinnett, and Henry counties are heading back to the polls to cast ballots in a race that will have an immediate impact on what happens in Congress. This is the race to replace the late Congressman David Scott in the U.S. House of Representatives. The Democrat served for more than 2 decades in Washington before his sudden death at the age of 80 back in April. His seat in the House has been empty since then. The congressman's daughter, Marcy Scott, and former Gwinnett County School Board Chair Everton Blair are on the ballot on Tuesday, fighting to fill his place. And whoever comes out on top will only serve out the remainder of David Scott's term in Congress, which runs until January. A separate general election in November will decide who will represent the 13th district for a full 2-year term in the House.
And next week, the panel of Georgia leaders tasked with picking a new voting system reconvenes. The Election Equipment Specifications and Standards Committee is set to hold their second meeting next Thursday at the Georgia Capitol. The committee is expected to hear testimony related to cybersecurity, accessibility, and election administration. They're going to tap Metro Atlanta election clerks and other county officials from across the state for that testimony. It's part of a long-term effort from state lawmakers to remove those QR codes right there from Georgia's ballots and shift to an entirely new voting system for 2028.
Georgia voters have just a few months to prepare for the midterm elections. This election season, Atlanta News First is working with nonpartisan election nonprofit Keep Our Republic to make sure that you are ready when you go to the polls. The group is working alongside election administrators from across Metro Atlanta to provide trusted, fact-based civic education in a time when the group's executive director, Ari Middleman, says misinformation can make it hard for voters to know what to expect when they go to cast their ballots.
It's everything from how what happens in the early voting periods, which many states have. As we know, many states have incorporated mail-in voting, the questions of who's on the voter rolls and how one gets on the voter rolls. Look, at the end of the day, elections are administered at the local level in our country, and no 2 jurisdictions are doing this exactly the same.
So Atlanta News First wants to hear from you. Text the word VOTE to the number on your screen, 470-777-9263, to ask us your questions about voting in the upcoming midterm elections.
Well, still ahead on the record, your kids just got back to school. It's the perfect time for this. The candidates battling to become the state's top educator are going on the record.
Now, from Atlanta News First, the issues that matter to you. This is On the Record.
This Sunday, Senator John Ossoff is poking the bear as he fights to defend his seat in the U.S. Senate, and that bear is Donald Trump. We're glad you're with us. I'm Rick Fulbaum.
And I'm Doug Reardon. The Democrat is intensifying his attacks on the president and his administration, publicly calling out one of the president's closest staffers during a rally here in Atlanta. Listen.
See, he doesn't want to do the job. He wants to build his ballroom and travel with Natalie on their apparently defenseless flying palace gifted by the Emir of Qatar.
As you heard there, the senator name-checking That woman, Natalie Harp, the president's executive assistant, who has been described as fiercely loyal to Trump. She was one of a small circle of aides who reportedly accompanied the president last month during a trip to Turkey when he made a secret plane switch to bypass security threats. Senator Ossoff's remarks are now fueling a political firestorm, with Trump administration officials condemning the comments.
White House Communications Director Stephen Chung even writing, quote, "Instead of denigrating hardworking people serving their country, John should look deep into his soul and ask himself why he's a miserable person who hates this country." President Trump shrugged off the comments from Ossoff when asked about them in the Oval Office, but the senator's general election opponent, Republican Congressman Mike Collins, wrote it off as a baseless personal attack and likening the remark to political theater.
What is your response to John Ossoff?
You mean Pee Wee Herman? Pee Wee Herman lookalike?
It's a punk move. I mean, that woman's not part of this campaign. To me and everyone else with a little common sense, we can see that she's doing her job, but John Ossoff can't seem to do his. He resorts to these baseless personal attacks because he doesn't have a record to run on.
The latest polling in the race for U.S. Senate shows Ossoff with a 7-point lead over Congressman Collins. Numbers from Insider Advantage show out of 800 likely voters, 50% favor Ossoff, 43% prefer Collins, and about 7% of those likely voters remain undecided. But that race is tightening as we continue to watch it and get closer to Election Day. This week, Georgia Democrats are getting a boost from outside of Georgia.
Arizona U.S. Senator Mark Kelly and his wife, former Congresswoman Gabby Giffords, made a trip to the Peach State last week. They were campaigning with John Ossoff at a veterans event in Columbus, and with State Senator Josh McLaurin, the Democratic nominee for lieutenant governor, at a small business in Sandy Springs. McLaurin told reporters Senator Kelly's visit shows voters that the Democratic Party is laser focused on the issues that matter.
And we're back with our panel. All right, Scott, this Natalie comment, this was obviously very well thought out. This wasn't an off-the-cuff remark. Why did he do it, and did it get the desired effect?
Well, I think he did it because he wanted to put Donald Trump's shoes on and see what it felt like to walk a mile in Donald Trump's shoes. He wanted to get into the mud. He wanted to show that he was a fighter. He baited the White House. I think that's part of the reason why he did it. He got the reaction that he wanted from the White House, and he raised his national profile. But what he did in the process of doing that was target a young woman who is very new in her political career, who was collateral damage in his political agenda and his agenda to ascend and keep his office. Think about that for a second and the implications there. His brand is this older, wiser, reserved, thoughtful person, and he's totally willing to go straight into the gutter and attack somebody who's a bystander for his own personal gain.
And Deborah, is that fair criticism? Because we heard Congressman Collins say this is not someone who's campaigning or running for anything and is really mostly behind the scenes. So maybe was it a bit too far for the Ossoff campaign to do this?
No, the Ossoff campaign, first of all, John Ossoff, Senator Ossoff, is an extremely effective communicator, and he is both willing and able to call out the corruption we see in the Trump administration. Natalie Harp happens to be a very powerful aide to the president, and by now we've all seen the letters as well. This was obviously an inappropriate relationship. Every letter signed off with love from Natalie, all of these things, all my love, I'm paraphrasing. But there's obviously something strange going on here. And Ossoff is willing to call it out and show that there are untoward relationships, people that are on taxpayer dollars contributing to the running of this country.
Deborah, we're certainly we're hearing a lot of attention that's being paid to Senator Ossoff. The national media is now talking about him as a potential candidate for 2028 for Democratic presidential nominee. And he's really changed his language now. It's gotten very bare knuckles. He's obviously, we've heard what he said about the president. He's also referring to his opponent in words that are very, very direct. I'm wondering what you think. Does this gain him votes? And as far as sort of trying to reach the moderates in the party that he really needs to win, is this something that could turn people off?
I don't think so. I think definitely it's geared towards the base. Obviously, the base is kind of fired up by this fiery rhetoric, if you will. But again, he's an extremely effective communicator, and it lands. He's got an amazing team of speechwriters. He's got an amazing finger on the pulse of what people care about and these viral moments in a good way. But what I do think is even more kind of compelling is his willingness to be a fighter in this moment. And people know that he is thoughtful. They know that he is not going to flippantly say something if it's not going to move the needle and be working on behalf of the people of Georgia.
Yeah, and Scott, I saw you shaking your head. Is there anything you want to respond to before I
I just want to make sure we understand what's being said here, that it's okay to accuse a staffer of an inappropriate relationship. It's not like we have a blue dress in this instance. We have some letters, and we have the fact that she's in close proximity to the president doing her job in a professional manner. That is what they are attacking. If that's on the table, then I don't see a difference between the rhetoric of Donald Trump and John Ossoff in this instance.
And I'm sure there are people who probably don't, and there are probably some folks who want to match that fire with some more fire of their own. Let me move on and ask you about something else. We just heard, of course, from State Senator McLaurin, who's running for lieutenant governor. There were a number of really high-powered Democratic names down here last week between Senator Kelly, former Congresswoman Gabby Giffords. We've seen people like Rick Scott come out for candidates like Rick Jackson, but when does Mike Collins start to bring some names in to campaign on his behalf? Because we saw those poll numbers too. He is behind.
Yeah, I don't think it really matters when outsiders come to Georgia. And it doesn't matter if it's Rick Scott or Ted Cruz for Rick Jackson as an example. Voters don't really key in on those things. I think it shows some support from the national organizations. But at the end of the day, if I'm Mike Collins, I don't want a national Republican coming to Georgia to pitch why they should vote for me. And if Donald Trump is already endorsed you, there's no point in trying to appeal to voters who are already going to vote for you. If I'm Mike Collins, I'm getting on the phone with Brian Kemp and I'm begging him every day to go to every campaign state with me through stop for the rest of this campaign. He is the one elected official in Georgia history that has the most crossover appeal. He's the one who can make the pitch that Mike Collins would be a safe bet and can bring along those skeptical voters that may be on the fence.
But with his endorsement and his very close friendship of Derek Dooley, Collins' one-time opponent, do you think he'll even do that?
Well, he already has endorsed, but Brian Kemp has a way of doing the right thing for the team all the time. And whether it's when he disagrees with Donald Trump, as he has in the past, not making that a focus about me, Brian Kemp, doing something in opposition to the president. It's about doing what's best for Georgia. And I think that's why he has credibility here that outside Republicans would not have.
Well, I got a chance to sit down with Senator Mark Kelly, we've been talking about, to talk purple state playbooks, party unity, and the formula needed to win over Georgia's independent voters. Your joint appearance with Senator Ossoff, of course, has led to the inevitable speculation about a Democratic presidential ticket in 2028. Are you interested in running for president, and could you envision a Kelly-Ossoff or Ossoff-Kelly ticket?
Well, let me make it perfectly clear. I've not made a decision about this, and John Ossoff is focused on winning here in November. We've got less than 80 days to go. This is a critical Senate race. Not only critical to the Democratic majority, but critical to the people of the state of Georgia.
Voters, of course, talk a lot about affordability and pocketbook issues. Right now, there seems to be some friction within the Democratic Party where there's a progressive wing that seems to be challenging the establishment. So I'm wondering why you think swing voters should trust Democrats now when there seems to be some internal fighting going on as far as the direction of your party.
Well, I think people would want to make this appear, certainly Republicans want this to appear as internal fighting. People are frustrated. Half of Americans are having a hard time affording food. Kids have lost SNAP benefits. They don't get their free lunch anymore. Poor kids. People are kicked off of Medicaid. Also, this president could give a big giant tax cut to his rich friends. So people are struggling, and I think this just recognizes that level of frustration. You have a president that said on day one he was going to lower their costs and he was going to end the war in Ukraine on day one. Not only did he not end the war in Ukraine, he also got us in a war with Iran, and he slapped on these tariffs because one of his yes people told him that this was a good idea and jacked up the price on everything for every American. So I think you see the frustration on the Republican side.
As a Navy combat veteran and former astronaut and thank you for your service to our country. You have dedicated your career, your life to public service. When you look at the escalating temperature of national politics here in the United States right now, what worries you most about our country's trajectory, and what do you think leaders from both parties need to do to cool it down?
And when you think about, turning down the temperature, right, that starts at the top. Donald Trump is the leader of this country, regardless of whether or not you voted for him. I did not vote for him. But he is the president of the United States, and leadership starts at the top.
Do Democrats have any role to play here, even in terms of helping to change the tide?
I am every time I post something on social media, every time I speak publicly about an issue, I seriously consider the effect that my words are going to have, always. We don't see that from Donald Trump, unfortunately. I mean, you see the stuff he has, posted about his political opponents, President and Michelle Obama. I mean, vile material that, he posts, and others. I mean, it is at a level that we've never seen before by any elected official anywhere in the country. Right now, there's little accountability. There's little we can do in the minority. We can speak about these issues, but to actually have the ability to provide serious accountability, you have to have either the House or the Senate in Democratic control. And I think we're going to get that.
And you can listen to my full interview with Senator Mark Kelly right now on the Atlanta News First app. Scan the code on your screen to download it for free. We'll be right back. Well, as the new school year ramps up across our state leaders are working to fine-tune our state's education system. Lawmakers met last week and heard from school leaders about the latest College and Career Ready Performance Index, or CCRPI. The Georgia Department of Education says the system is supposed to give educators data that helps with school improvement and accountability, but Barrow County educators told lawmakers the data that comes from the report can sometimes be hard to understand and even outdated.
The timing matters when districts receive the final results is after many school year decisions have already been made. So it kind of makes it hard, makes it more reflective than it does actionable at that point. For accountability to support improvement, it needs to make the story behind that score clear and easier to understand.
They also told lawmakers what they think will make the important metrics more useful in the long run, including making the data easier for the public to understand, more accessible, and catering the data to specific communities.
And Georgia's top educator is back on the ballot this fall.
Richard Woods has served as state school superintendent since 2015. But his work leading Georgia's Department of Education has come under scrutiny in recent years, including from leaders in the legislature like House Speaker John Burns, who endorsed Woods' Republican primary challenger this year, helping to force the primary into a runoff.
Woods came out on top in that runoff, but now he faces Democratic nominee and Henry County educator Dr. Lydia Powell on the November ballot. And as your kids head back to school, I sat down on the record with both candidates to talk about their vision for the future of public education in Georgia. Democrat Lydia Powell, incumbent Republican Richard Woods. Whoever wins the race for state superintendent in November will have a lot on their plates. With an estimated 2 in 3 Georgia students unable to read proficiently by 3rd grade, a new literacy bill passed this year will place reading coaches in every state elementary school to aid districts in improving reading levels. Powell wants to make sure schools get the right people without too much burden on their budget.
So one thing I didn't like about the bill was the funding that's associated with it. We have $70 million that it's included in the funding to roll out this literacy plan. But we put a lot more money in something like school vouchers, which is $100 million. So the priority isn't really there to start the rollout.
Woods, who's run the state's public school system for the past 12 years, says his data shows a rosier picture of Georgia's literacy levels, telling me his stats show only 1/3 of Georgia's students, not 2/3, aren't on level by 3rd grade. Is it the case that this reading crisis, as it's been described, is not as bad as maybe some have made it out to seem?
Well, I don't want to understate the importance of reading. I think, that extremely is important. It's definitely not as bad when you say a third of our kids are reading proficient. Is it where we want it to be? No, it's not. I'm not happy with 65%, and we want to make sure we increase that number. We only have one test in the state of Georgia that tests all kids. That's the milestones. We only have one metric, and right now, my metric shows that 65% of our kids are actually on grade level in third grade. So I think, it is making sure we work off the same, number that's out there. I think that's very important.
Both candidates will also face the task of getting and keeping Georgia teachers in the classroom. A 2023 report from the Professional Association of Georgia Educators showed that 82% of Georgia's schools are short on teachers. A study they conducted a year later showed 42% of Georgia's teachers felt burnt out.
They're having to pay for their own program, to become an educator, their own testing. If we have a teacher shortage and we want to retain teachers, paraprofessionals that are already in the building, make it easier.
Anytime you're looking at the funding formula itself, there is a disadvantage of that, that where you might have funding, say, for 1.2% of a teacher. Well, you really could use a full second percent, and unfortunately that means that our districts have to cut into that. So I think if I probably had a recommendation, let's don't work on halves or percentages, but always round up to fully fund the next full teacher. I think that would help our districts.
And in fact, funding is something the candidates can agree on. Georgia's Quality Basic Education formula, referred to as the QBE, hasn't been updated since 1985. Does Georgia have a problem with how it funds its public schools?
Yes, 100%. It doesn't take into account poverty. And when we look at the economic disadvantage in our state, children are 70% in the economic disadvantage. So if there's no weight to that, and research also shows that when you're economically disadvantaged, your test scores are lower, your ability to have resources is lower, and it is an indication on how well you'll do in school.
The biggest issue was they tried to eat the elephant at one bite. There's a lot of moving pieces within the formula. And I've always proposed more of an incremental, approach to say, well, let's see what happens to the formula, because we have to operate within a balanced budget. But one of the biggest issues, if not the biggest issue in the state of Georgia that we face in education really is poverty. Poverty has a major impact on family life, family support.
A recent push by the Georgia legislature to eliminate property taxes also worried public school officials at every level. Much of the funding for state schools are collected through property taxes. People were extremely concerned that if the legislature had eliminated property taxes, that would really impact the funding that those taxes provided to local schools.
It will be detrimental to a local school district because year after year, the state has given less. They've put in less in our local schools. It's maybe 40% at this point, 42% for some districts. So that means more than half of the budget comes from your local school system. So yes, you need property taxes. We need to attract better businesses to our communities to make sure they're paying in it.
When you have a massive revenue vacuum like that, something has to fill it. Because at the end of the day, from a constitutional standpoint, we have to adequately fund public education. That is what we do. But, I think there are things we can look at. I think for me, can we shrink the size of state government?
Woods has faced recent criticism from members of the legislature, even within his own party, accusing him of being absentee on the literacy bill they passed this year. Some Republicans even endorsed his primary challenger, forcing the longtime superintendent into an unexpected runoff. What is the status of the relationship with the legislature?
Well, it's always important because these are individuals that, they're in charge of the funding, and so we have to make sure that we're adequately funded. Some of the attacks or some of the, rhetoric that was out there I thought was a bit unfair. Again, their particular disagreement with that, was somewhat surprising. But, as far as I'm concerned, I'm, always have an open door policy.
And you can listen to my full interview with Dr. Lydia Powell and Richard Woods right now on the Atlanta News First app. Scan the code right there on your screen to download it for free.
Coming up next on The Record, a new push in Georgia to send medical marijuana by mail. The recent change in Washington that advocates say could make it possible. This Sunday, the CDC's new leader is now pledging to advocate for the agency while addressing staff burnout and understaffing issues. Last week, Dr. Erica Schwartz, the agency's new director, spoke to employees during her first all-hands staff meeting, and she acknowledged reports of staffers feeling exhausted and overloaded. Schwartz also reportedly discussed challenges like zombie programs or congressionally funded initiatives that lacked staff because of layoffs. Last week, the Associated Press reports that CDC employees have compiled a list of dozens of funded but decimated CDC programs, including the Office on Smoking and Health, a $41 million Alzheimer's initiative for better surveillance, risk prevention, and communications campaigns, a sickle cell disease data collection program, and the Pregnancy Risk Assessment Monitoring System.
And Georgia healthcare activists are now proposing new changes to medical marijuana accessibility. They want patients to be able to receive medical cannabis through the mail. That's right. It's a change that state officials say might actually be possible without further approval from lawmakers. Back in April, the Trump administration downgraded the classification of medical marijuana from the highest Schedule 1 rating down to Schedule 3. It's welcome news to people like Corey Lowe, the caretaker of a daughter who gets constant seizures.
If someone has cancer, if someone has seizures, or they're on hospice care, they can't just hop in the car and drive 30 minutes to a dispensary and get medicine. Honestly, like having a baby, you have to get a diaper bag ready and get the person ready and load up their wheelchair and travel to the store. So it's a lot easier to have the convenience.
Yeah, the group behind these potential changes, the Georgia Access to Medical Cannabis Commission, will vote on their recommendations to lawmakers next month.
And that is our show for this week. Thanks very much to our guests, Scott Turner and Deborah Shigley.
And thanks as always to you for watching. There are now 72 days until the midterms. We love our countdowns. We'll see you next Sunday.